You're lying in bed right now, probably scrolling through your phone when you should be sleeping. And honestly, you probably won't make it through this ancient Egyptian day we're about to explore together, which is perfectly fine, because that's exactly what we're here for. If this helps you drift off into peaceful sleep, please give us a gentle like and subscribe when you wake up. And I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. I'll read every single one. There's something wonderfully connecting about knowing we're all seeking the same quiet rest, just scattered across different time zones. Now let's ease into tonight's journey, back to a time when your biggest worry wasn't whether your Wi-Fi would work, but whether the gods would accept your onion offerings. You wake up in a small mud brick house in Thebes, an ancient Egyptian city located along the Nile, about 800 kilometers south of the Mediterranean. Its ruins lie within the modern Egyptian city of Luxor. It's sometime around 1550 BCE, during the height of Egypt's New Kingdom. The air is thick and warm, carrying the scent of bread baking somewhere nearby and the distant sound of the Nile lapping against the riverbank. Your bed isn't much, a simple wooden frame with rope webbing and a thin linen sheet, but it's kept you safe through another night, and that's more important than you might realize. You stretch, feeling the familiar ache in your back from yesterday's work, and notice something that would seem utterly bizarre to modern eyes. A small pile of onions sitting in a clay bowl beside your bed. Not for cooking, mind you, but because your grandmother swore they kept the nightmares away. She'd place them there every evening, muttering prayers to Bes, the dwarf god of protection, who was basically ancient Egypt's version of a supernatural security guard. The major historical fact that shapes your morning routine is this: ancient Egyptians genuinely believed that onions possessed magical protective properties, not just against bad dreams, but against evil spirits, disease, and death itself. Workers building the pyramids were paid partly in onions, and pharaohs were buried with them for the afterlife. Your ancestors weren't just being superstitious, they were following thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about these layered vegetables that made people cry, which seemed like pretty solid evidence of their spiritual power. You pad across the packed earth floor, your bare feet already knowing every bump and depression. The house is small, just 3 rooms for your family of 6, but it's yours. And that matters in a world where most people live at the mercy of landlords or masters. Through the single window, you can see your neighbor Kiti already up and tending to his small garden plot, probably talking to his vegetables the way he talks to his children, with equal parts frustration and affection. The weird cultural tidbit that would make absolutely no sense to modern sensibilities. Your morning routine includes checking the color of your urine, not for health reasons, but because different colors supposedly predicted different kinds of luck for the day ahead. Golden yellow meant prosperity, dark amber warned of family troubles, and clear meant the gods were ignoring you entirely, which, depending on your perspective, could be either wonderful or terrifying. You splash water on your face from a clay pitcher, the liquid cool against your skin despite the early hour. The water comes from the Nile, of course, filtered through cloth and boiled because your people aren't stupid, whatever later civilizations might assume. Your reflection wavers in the bronze mirror, showing a face marked by sun and work, but also by laughter lines around your eyes. Life is hard, but it's not without its moments of joy. Historians still debate whether the onion nightmare connection was purely superstitious, or if ancient Egyptians somehow understood that the strong smell could affect sleep patterns and brain chemistry. What's certain is that you reach for one of those onions now, holding it close to your nose and breathing in that sharp, familiar scent that promises protection. Your grandmother's voice echoes in your memory. The tears of the onion wash away the fears of the night. You dress in your simple linen tunic, the fabric soft from countless washings, and prepare to face another day in ancient Egypt, where the line between the practical and the magical is as thin as onion skin and just as likely to make you cry if you're not careful. You step outside into air that's already warming despite the early hour, and immediately you're hit with the complex symphony of sounds that make up morning in ancient Thebes. There's the rhythmic thud of grain being pounded in mortars, the bleating of goats being led to pasture, and underneath it all, the constant murmur of the Nile, the river that's basically Egypt's version of a multitasking overachiever, serving as highway, irrigation system, and divine presence all rolled into one. Your first stop is the communal well, where the neighborhood women gather to collect water and, more importantly, to exchange the gossip that keeps this ancient society functioning. Think of it as the original social media platform, except instead of posting updates, you're balancing a clay jar on your head while trying to remember which neighbor's husband was seen talking to which merchant's daughter near the temple yesterday. The major historical fact that governs your entire morning is this: ancient Egyptian society was surprisingly egalitarian when it came to daily labor and social interaction. Women could own property, run businesses, and divorce their husbands, rights that wouldn't be common in many other cultures for thousands of years. You're not just fetching water because you're female. You're participating in the economic and social backbone of your community. At the well, you meet Nefertiti, not the famous queen, obviously, but your neighbor whose parents had high hopes and a limited imagination when it came to names. She's already deep in conversation with Seneb, the local midwife, about the strange dreams that have been plaguing half the neighborhood. Apparently, everyone's been having visions of crocodiles wearing human clothing, which is either a sign from the gods or evidence that someone's been putting questionable herbs in the communal bread. The weird cultural tidbit that would absolutely baffle modern dream analysts. Ancient Egyptians believed that dreams were messages from the dead, and they kept detailed dream journals carved on pottery shards. They had professional dream interpreters who could tell you whether your nightmare about being chased by a giant scarab beetle meant you were about to get rich or needed to make an offering to Khepri, the dung beetle god. Yes, they had a dung beetle god. Ancient Egypt was nothing if not thorough in their divine coverage. You fill your jar with water, the cool liquid sloshing gently as you hoist it onto your head with practiced ease. The weight settles into your neck and shoulders like an old friend. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. As you walk back toward your house, you pass the local temple where the morning rituals are already underway. The priests are burning incense and chanting prayers that drift through the air like musical smoke, mixing with the scent of baking bread and the earthy smell of the irrigation canals. Historians still debate whether the elaborate morning temple rituals were genuine religious devotion or sophisticated community theater designed to reinforce social hierarchies. But as you pause to listen, you find yourself murmuring along with the familiar words. There's something comforting about participating in rituals that your great-great-grandmother would have known by heart, even if you're not entirely sure what half of them mean. Back at your house, you find your family stirring to life. Your husband Amenhotep is already up and preparing his tools for another day of work on the tomb paintings that will hopefully ensure some wealthy official's comfortable afterlife. Your children are grumbling about getting up because apparently complaining about morning routines is a human universal that transcends time and culture. Your mother-in-law is checking the onions by everyone's bedside, nodding approvingly at the ones that have turned slightly brown overnight. A sign, she insists, that they've absorbed negative energy and done their job. You begin preparing the morning meal, grinding barley for bread, and trying to remember whether you have enough dried fish to last until market day. The repetitive motion of the grinding stone is almost meditative, and you find your mind drifting to the strange dreams you've been having lately. Not the crocodile in clothing variety that's been making the rounds, but something else entirely. Dreams of vast libraries filled with scrolls, of knowledge written in scripts no one in your time could read. You don't mention these dreams to anyone, because honestly, who has time for that level of philosophical complexity before breakfast? The onions sit in their bowls, silent guardians against the chaos of the night, and you can't help but wonder if they really work, or if believing they work is enough to make them work, which is pretty much the same thing when you think about it. The bread dough beneath your hands is warm and slightly sticky, responding to your kneading with the patience that only comes from thousands of mornings spent in this exact rhythm. You've been making bread since you were tall enough to reach the grinding stone, and your hands know the feel of properly mixed dough, the way a musician knows the right tension in a harp string. The yeast, wild yeast captured from the air and carefully tended like a temperamental pet, bubbles gently in its clay pot, ready to transform your simple mixture of barley flour and water into something that will sustain your family through another day. Your youngest daughter, Merit, appears at your elbow with the dedicated focus of a child who has spotted an opportunity for mischief. She's supposed to be helping her older brother tend the small patch of vegetables behind the house, but she's clearly decided that watching you work is far more interesting than pulling weeds. You hand her a small piece of dough to keep her occupied, and she begins shaping it into what she claims is a hippopotamus but looks more like a lumpy river stone with aspirations. The major historical fact that governs your bread making is this. Ancient Egyptians were the first civilization to develop controlled fermentation for bread making, creating over 30 different types of bread and essentially inventing the foundation of Western baking. Your wild yeast starter is a living link to thousands of years of culinary evolution, and the bread you're making will be far more complex and flavorful than the flat, unleavened cakes that most of the ancient world considers adequate sustenance. Outside, you can hear the familiar argument beginning between your neighbor Kiti and his son about the proper way to irrigate their garden plot. It's the same argument they have every morning, with the dedication of actors performing a well-rehearsed play. Katie insists that the water channels should run north to south, following the natural flow of the Nile's blessing, while his son maintains that east to west makes more practical sense for their particular patch of soil. Neither of them will budge, and neither of them really expects to win. It's just their way of greeting the day together. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem utterly impractical to modern gardeners. Ancient Egyptians believed that plants grew better if you sang to them, but only specific songs at specific times of day. Morning songs were supposed to encourage growth, afternoon songs promoted flowering, and evening songs helped the plants rest properly. Your neighbor Kiti takes this very seriously, and his slightly off-key renditions of agricultural hymns have become as much a part of the morning soundscape as the roosters and the water sellers calling their wares. You shape the bread into small round loaves and place them on flat stones near the fire pit, where they'll bake slowly in the residual heat from the coals. The smell of baking bread begins to fill the air, mingling with the ever-present scent of the onions that seem to perfume every corner of your daily life. Your mother-in-law emerges from the back room, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints protest the morning's demands, and nods approvingly at your bread-making technique. She doesn't offer much verbal praise, She's from a generation that believes compliments make people soft, but her nod carries the weight of decades of expertise. Historians still debate whether the elaborate bread-baking rituals were primarily nutritional or held deeper religious significance. But as you watch the loaves slowly brown and rise, you find yourself whispering a small prayer to Renenutet, the cobra goddess of the harvest. It's partly habit, partly insurance, and partly genuine gratitude for another morning when your family won't go hungry. Your husband Amenhotep returns from his morning ablutions at the canal, his face freshly shaved with the bronze razor that's one of his most prized possessions. Clean-shaven faces are practically mandatory for men in your social class. Beards are for pharaohs, gods, and people who've given up on making a good impression. He examines the bread with the critical eye of someone who knows that a good breakfast can make the difference between a productive day and a miserable one, then breaks off a piece of the crust and chews thoughtfully. The yeast is strong today, he observes, which in the complex language of married couples means both "this tastes good" and "thank you for getting up early to make sure we eat well." You smile and hand him one of the smaller loaves to take with him to work, wrapped in a clean linen cloth that will also serve as a paint rag by evening. The bread will keep him fed while he spends hours bent over tomb walls, painting scenes of eternal abundance for people who can afford to take their earthly wealth into the afterlife. Merit has finished sculpting her hippopotamus and is now working on what appears to be an entire zoo of dough animals, each one more abstract than the last. You let her continue. There's something wonderfully optimistic about a child who sees infinite creative possibility in leftover bread dough, and besides, the small pieces will bake into perfectly good snacks for later. The morning market beckons with its familiar chaos of bleating animals, shouting vendors, and the underlying hum of commerce that's been the soundtrack of human civilization since people first figured out that trading was more efficient than hitting each other with sticks. You gather your market basket, woven from palm fronds by your sister-in-law, who has an annoying talent for making everything she touches both beautiful and practical, and prepare to venture into the organized mayhem that is ancient Egyptian retail therapy. Your shopping list exists entirely in your memory because writing materials are expensive and your mental catalogue of household needs is more reliable than any scrap of papyrus. You need onions, obviously. You can never have too many onions when they're serving as both seasoning and supernatural protection. You also need salt, dried fish, a new water jar to replace the one your son cracked yesterday, and if the grain merchant is feeling generous, perhaps some of the good barley that doesn't require quite so much sifting to remove the stones and chaff. The major historical fact that shapes your entire shopping experience is this: ancient Egypt operated on a barter economy for most daily transactions, with specific exchange rates that everyone knew by heart. A day's worth of bread might trade for a sandal repair, 3 onions could get you a small jar of beer, and a well-woven basket might be worth a month's supply of lamp oil. Money as we know it won't be invented for centuries, so your purchasing power depends entirely on your ability to negotiate and your reputation for honest dealing. The onion vendor, a weathered woman named Tawaret, who's been selling vegetables in this same spot since before you were born, greets you with the sort of familiarity that comes from years of mutually beneficial commerce. Her stall is a masterpiece of ancient Egyptian marketing. Onions arranged by size and quality, with the premium specimens displayed at eye level and the slightly bruised ones tucked discreetly to the side. She knows you'll buy the good ones for your family's protection rituals and the imperfect ones for cooking, and she's already calculating the exchange rate for your basket of yesterday's extra bread. The weird cultural tidbit that would baffle modern consumer protection agencies. Ancient Egyptian merchants were required by custom to taste their own food products in front of customers to prove they weren't selling anything spoiled or poisoned. Tawaret bites into one of her onions with theatrical relish, her eyes watering dramatically as she nods and declares it sharp enough to make the demons weep. It's partly genuine quality control and partly street theatre, but it works. You trust her onions because she's willing to suffer through their intensity right in front of you. You select your onions with the careful attention of someone who understands their multiple purposes, checking for firm flesh and intact skins that will hold up through several nights of spiritual guard duty. Tawaret wraps them in broad leaves and adds an extra small onion for the children's dreams, because she's been in this business long enough to know that customer loyalty is built on small kindnesses as much as fair prices. Historians still debate whether the elaborate market rituals were genuine religious observance or clever sales techniques, but as you move from stall to stall, you notice how each vendor incorporates small prayers and blessings into their transactions. The fish seller mutters an invocation to Sobek, the crocodile god, asking him to keep the catch fresh. The grain merchant sprinkles a few seeds on the ground as an offering to Renanutet. Even the potter who's trying to sell you a replacement water jar traces a protective symbol in the clay before wrapping it for transport. The salt vendor is having an animated discussion with another customer about the relative merits of sea salt versus rock salt for preserving meat, a debate that's apparently been raging since the dawn of food storage. Sea salt is more expensive but dissolves more evenly, while rock salt is cheaper but tends to leave a slightly mineral taste in preserved foods. You listen with half an ear while examining his wares, mentally calculating whether you can afford the good salt this month or if you'll need to make do with the coarser variety that requires more grinding. The fish merchant recognizes you from previous visits and immediately begins his practiced sales pitch about the freshness of today's catch, caught just this morning from the Nile's most productive fishing grounds. You nod politely while running your fingers along the fish's flesh, checking for the firmness that indicates genuine freshness rather than optimistic salesmanship. The fish passes your inspection, and you add several to your basket, already planning the evening meal that will sustain your family through another night of onion-guarded sleep. A small commotion near the grain stalls catches your attention. Apparently someone's been accused of using weighted measures, a serious offense that could result in anything from public shaming to a beating, depending on the severity of the fraud. You're not particularly surprised. Market justice is swift and decisive in a world where everyone knows everyone else's business, and reputation is often more valuable than actual wealth. The afternoon sun beats down with the relentless intensity that makes you grateful for the narrow streets and tall buildings that create precious pockets of shade throughout the city. You've finished your morning marketing and returned home to find your house transformed into a small center of domestic industry. Your mother-in-law has set up her loom in the courtyard and is working on a length of linen that will eventually become new tunics for the children, while your eldest daughter helps by keeping the threads untangled and pretending she's not desperately bored by the repetitive work. The rhythm of the loom creates a steady background percussion as you begin preparing the midday meal, a simple affair of bread, dried fish and fresh onions sliced thin and dressed with a bit of precious oil. It's not elaborate, but it's nourishing, and more importantly, it leaves you energy for the afternoon's tasks. Your husband will return from his work at the tomb site soon, dusty and tired from a morning spent painting scenes of eternal abundance on limestone walls, and he'll need both food and a few moments of quiet to recover from the physical demands of his craft. The major historical fact that governs your afternoon is this: Ancient Egyptian artisans like your husband were highly skilled professionals who worked in organized teams under royal patronage, creating some of the most sophisticated and enduring art in human history. The tomb paintings he's working on today will survive for thousands of years, their colors still vibrant when future archaeologists discover them, though he has no way of knowing that his careful brushwork will outlast empires and languages and entire ways of life. Your youngest son appears at your elbow with a scraped knee and the sort of tragic expression that suggests this minor injury might be the end of the world as he knows it. You examine the scrape with the practiced eye of someone who's treated countless childhood catastrophes, then reach for your household remedy kit, a collection of herbs, oils, and other treatments that represent centuries of accumulated medical wisdom mixed with a healthy dose of hopeful superstition. The weird cultural tidbit that would absolutely horrify modern pediatricians. Your first aid treatment involves cleaning the wound with beer. Not because ancient Egyptians were alcoholics, but because they discovered through trial and error that beer was often cleaner than water and seemed to prevent infections. You have no understanding of bacteria or antiseptics, but you do know that wounds treated with beer heal better than wounds treated with canal water, and sometimes practical experience is more valuable than theoretical knowledge. You clean your son's scrape gently, murmuring the sort of reassuring nonsense that mothers have probably been using since the first child fell down and needed comfort. He sniffles dramatically, but allows you to apply a small bandage made from clean linen and secured with a sticky resin that your neighbor collects from certain trees along the riverbank. The bandage is more psychological than medical. The scrape is minor, but it transforms him from a wounded victim back into a resilient child ready for whatever adventure awaits. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian medical practices were primarily empirical or magical, but as you watch your son's tears dry and his confidence return, you're reminded that healing is often as much about care and attention as it is about specific treatments. The combination of practical first aid and maternal concern seems to work regardless of whether you understand the underlying mechanisms. Your husband arrives home right on schedule, his hands stained with the pigments that mark his trade. Ochre yellow under his fingernails, traces of red iron oxide on his wrists, and the faint blue of ground lapis lazuli that costs more than most people earn in a month. He's been working on a scene depicting the deceased nobleman's journey through the afterlife, complete with the various challenges and tests that await every soul seeking eternal paradise. It's detailed, demanding work that requires both artistic skill and deep knowledge of religious symbolism. He settles into the shade of the courtyard with visible relief, accepting the simple meal you've prepared and eating with the focused attention of someone who's been concentrating intensely all morning. Between bites, he tells you about the progress on the tomb. The walls are nearly complete, but there's been some discussion among the artisan teams about the proper positioning of certain hieroglyphs in the burial chamber. Apparently, even in ancient Egypt, creative professionals had strong opinions about the correct way to do their jobs. The afternoon stretches ahead with its familiar rhythm of small tasks and domestic maintenance. There are clothes to be mended, children to be supervised, and always the ongoing challenge of keeping a household functioning in a world where every necessity requires personal attention and care. You find yourself looking forward to evening when the day's heat will finally break, and you can sit in the courtyard with your family, sharing the day's experiences and preparing for another night under the protection of your faithful onions. Your mother-in-law looks up from her weaving to offer a rare piece of unsolicited advice about the proper way to store the fish you bought this morning, because apparently your 20 years of household management still isn't quite enough to inspire her complete confidence in your domestic abilities. You nod politely and make a mental note to do exactly what you were planning to do anyway, because some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when they involve fish storage and mothers-in-law. The late afternoon brings visitors. Your sister Mutnojmet and her husband Nacht, who live several streets away in a house that's slightly larger than yours but requires twice as much maintenance because Nacht has ambitious ideas about home improvement and limited practical skills to execute them. They arrive with their youngest child in tow, a precocious girl who immediately begins inspecting your household arrangements with the critical eye of someone who's been taught that there's always room for improvement in other people's domestic strategies. Mutnojmet settles herself in the courtyard with the satisfied sigh of someone who's been walking in the heat and has finally found shade and hospitality. She's brought a small jar of honey as a gift. Real honey, not the date syrup that most people use as sweetener, which represents a significant gesture of generosity and affection. Honey is precious stuff, partly because it keeps indefinitely and partly because harvesting it requires either great courage or a complete disregard for personal safety when dealing with angry bees. The major historical fact that shapes your afternoon social visit is this. Ancient Egyptian society was built around extended family networks that provided both economic support and social security in ways that formal institutions couldn't match. Your sister's visit isn't just casual socializing, it's part of an ongoing system of mutual aid and information sharing that helps your family navigate everything from medical emergencies to marriage negotiations for your children. The conversation naturally turns to the strange dreams that have been plaguing the neighborhood, and Mutnojmet reveals that she's been having her own unsettling nighttime visions, not the popular crocodiles in clothing variety, but dreams of being lost in vast underground chambers filled with jars containing things she doesn't want to identify. She's tried the usual remedies, extra onions by the bedside, prayers to bears, even sleeping with her head pointing in different directions to confuse any malevolent spirits that might be targeting her family. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem utterly logical to ancient Egyptians but completely bizarre to modern dream researchers. When home remedies fail, the next step is to consult a professional dream interpreter who can prescribe specific combinations of amulets, dietary changes, and ritual behaviors based on the exact content and timing of your nightmares. It's like therapy, except instead of talking through your psychological issues, you're trying to decode messages from deceased relatives and various gods who apparently have strong opinions about your sleep schedule. Your husband joins the conversation from his position in the shade where he's been cleaning his brushes and preparing his materials for tomorrow's work. He mentions that several of his fellow artisans have been reporting similar dream disturbances, which is either a coincidence or evidence that something supernatural is affecting the entire community. The tomb work has been proceeding normally, but there's been an unusual number of minor accidents and equipment failures that might be related to spiritual unrest. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian dream interpretation was primarily psychological insight or elaborate superstition, but as you listen to your sister describe her underground chamber nightmares, you can't help noticing how closely they mirror her real-life anxieties about providing for her family's future. Sometimes the most practical wisdom comes disguised as mystical revelation, and sometimes people need permission from the gods to acknowledge truths they already know. The children have gathered in a small group and are playing a game that involves tossing painted pottery shards and trying to land them in specific patterns. It's partly skill, partly luck, and entirely absorbing for young minds. that haven't yet learned to worry about the larger complexities of adult life. Their laughter provides a cheerful counterpoint to the adult conversation about disturbing dreams and spiritual remedies, reminding you that some aspects of human experience remain beautifully constant across generations. Nakt, who's been mostly quiet while the women discussed dreams and domestic concerns, finally contributes his own perspective on the neighborhood's supernatural troubles. He's been talking to the local priest, who suggests that the disturbances might be related to improper burial practices for someone who died recently. Apparently, if the deceased person's their spiritual double, isn't properly settled, it can cause restless sleep for everyone in the vicinity. It's the sort of explanation that sounds perfectly reasonable when you live in a world where the spiritual and physical realms are considered equally real and equally influential. Your mother-in-law emerges from the house with a tray of small cups filled with beer, the mild, nutritious beverage that serves as both refreshment and liquid bread in your daily diet. She's added a touch of honey to each cup in honor of your guests, transforming an ordinary afternoon drink into something approaching luxury. The beer is cool from being stored in clay jars buried in the earth beneath your house, and it tastes like civilization itself, complex, nourishing, and slightly fermented in the most delightful way. The conversation drifts from dreams to more practical concerns. The rising price of good linen, the challenge of finding reliable workers for harvest season, and the ongoing debate about whether the new tax assessments are fair or represent government overreach. These are the eternal concerns of middle-class families in any era. How to maintain your standard of living, how to provide for your children's future, and how to navigate the demands of authorities who always seem to need more resources for their various projects and ambitions. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that make even the most mundane mud brick buildings look momentarily majestic, your visitors prepare to make their way home before the evening's activities begin in earnest. Mutnojmet gathers her things with the practiced efficiency of someone who's mastered the art of graceful departure, while her husband Nakt attempts to collect their daughter, who's become deeply invested in teaching your youngest son a complicated clapping game that involves more giggling than actual coordination. The evening routine beckons with its familiar rhythm of tasks that have probably remained unchanged since the first humans figured out that preparing for nightfall was essential for survival and sanity. You begin the process of securing your house for the night, banking the cooking fire so it will provide coals for tomorrow's breakfast, checking that all water vessels are properly covered to prevent contamination, and most importantly, refreshing the onions beside each family member's sleeping space. The major historical fact that governs your evening preparations is this: ancient Egyptian households operated on sophisticated cycles of daily maintenance that reflected thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about food preservation, health management, and spiritual protection. Your seemingly simple routine of onion placement and fire banking represents a complex understanding of practical chemistry, nutrition, and psychology that won't be formally documented by scholars for millennia. Your mother-in-law supervises the onion replacement with the dedication of someone who takes supernatural security very seriously indeed. She examines each bulb carefully, rejecting any that show signs of softening or sprouting because compromised onions obviously can't provide adequate protection against dream demons. The discarded onions don't go to waste. They'll be chopped and added to tomorrow's stew. But tonight's guardian duty requires only the finest specimens, firm and pungent and ready to wage war against whatever supernatural nonsense might threaten your family's rest. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem utterly reasonable to ancient Egyptians but completely absurd to modern sleep hygienists. The positioning of protective onions follows specific geometric principles based on the cardinal directions and the sleeper's birth month. Spring babies get onions placed to the north and east. Summer children require south and west positioning, and so forth. It's like feng shui, except instead of harmonizing with cosmic energy flows, you're trying to create a vegetable-based security perimeter around unconscious family members. Your husband has finished his evening ablutions and is sitting in the courtyard, sharing the day's work experiences with anyone willing to listen. Today's tomb painting involved a particularly challenging scene depicting the weighing of the deceased's heart against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. Getting the proportions right required careful calculation and steady hands, because artistic mistakes in tomb paintings aren't just aesthetic problems. They could theoretically affect the deceased person's chances of achieving eternal paradise, which is the sort of professional pressure that modern artists rarely face. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian artisans truly believed their work had spiritual consequences or simply maintained professional standards for practical reasons. But as you listen to your husband describe his careful attention to religious symbolism and traditional iconography, you're struck by how seriously he takes his responsibility for someone else's afterlife. It's the kind of job where perfectionism isn't just about personal pride. It's about cosmic consequences. The children begin their own evening preparations with the sort of chaotic enthusiasm that makes you grateful bedtime is still hours away. They need to be washed, fed a light evening meal, and gradually convinced that sleep is actually desirable rather than a cruel interruption of their various ongoing projects and investigations. Your eldest daughter has discovered a small beetle in the courtyard and is conducting what appears to be serious scientific research into its behavioral patterns, while your son is building an elaborate construction project out of dried reeds and pottery shards. The evening meal is simple but satisfying: leftover bread from the morning's baking, fresh onions sliced thin and dressed with oil and vinegar, dried figs that provide sweetness and essential nutrients, and cups of the same honeyed beer that made your afternoon visitors so mellow and talkative. It's not a feast, but it's nourishing and flavorful, the sort of meal that reminds you that good food doesn't require complexity or exotic ingredients, just care, quality materials, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of cooks who understood that feeding people well is one of the fundamental acts of love. Your mother-in-law contributes her own evening wisdom by checking the color and consistency of everyone's urine one final time before bed, because apparently morning predictions aren't sufficient for comprehensive health monitoring. She nods approvingly at most of the results but makes pointed comments about your husband's fluid intake, suggesting that someone who works in the heat all day should be drinking more water and less beer, no matter how mild and nutritious that beer might be. The familiar sounds of evening begin to drift through the neighborhood, children being called inside for baths and bedtime stories, the lowing of cattle being led back from pasture, and the distant chanting from the temple where the evening rituals ensure that the gods remain properly honored and theoretically well disposed toward human concerns. It's the soundtrack of civilization winding down for another night, preparing for the vulnerable hours when consciousness retreats and the spiritual world supposedly becomes more active and influential. You find yourself looking forward to your own bedtime routine, to the moment when you'll place fresh onions beside your sleeping mat and settle into the familiar comfort of domestic security. The day has been full but manageable, marked by small satisfactions and minor challenges that remind you that life, even in ancient Egypt, is mostly about handling ordinary responsibilities with care and attention rather than dramatic adventures or cosmic revelations. The deepening twilight brings with it the sort of soft, golden light that makes everything look slightly magical, as if the ordinary world is preparing to transform into something more mysterious and potentially dangerous. You've gathered your family in the courtyard for the evening's final meal, a light supper that won't sit heavily in anyone's stomach during the night, but will provide enough nourishment to ward off the sort of midnight hunger that can disturb even the most onion-protected sleep. The meal consists of soft bread soaked in milk, fresh dates that your neighbor traded for some of your morning's extra loaves, and small portions of cheese made from goat's milk that's been carefully aged in clay pots buried in the cool earth beneath your house. It's comfort food in the truest sense. Simple, familiar flavors that signal the transition from the active demands of daytime to the restorative quiet of evening. Your children eat with the focused attention that comes just before tiredness overwhelms their natural resistance to bedtime. The major historical fact that shapes your evening routine is this. Ancient Egyptian families developed sophisticated nighttime rituals that combined practical health measures with spiritual protection practices, creating bedtime routines that addressed both physical comfort and psychological security. Your seemingly simple preparations for sleep actually represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about human psychology, family dynamics, and the management of anxiety in an uncertain world. Your husband finishes his evening meal and begins the process of preparing his work materials for tomorrow's tasks, cleaning brushes that will carry pigments worth more than most people's monthly income, organizing small pots of paint that represent complex chemical formulations developed through centuries of artistic experimentation, and carefully wrapping his most delicate tools in soft linen to protect them from dust and damage. It's meditative work that helps him transition from the creative focus of his daytime labor to the relaxed awareness appropriate for family time. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem perfectly logical to ancient Egyptians but utterly bizarre to modern families. Your evening routine includes a brief ceremony where each family member handles their protective onions while reciting personal prayers or intentions for the night ahead. It's not elaborate, just a moment of individual reflection while holding vegetables, but it serves as both spiritual practice and family bonding ritual, ensuring that everyone feels personally invested in the household's collective security. Your mother-in-law emerges from the house carrying an oil lamp that casts dancing shadows on the courtyard walls, transforming familiar spaces into something slightly otherworldly and mysterious. The lamp is both practical necessity and aesthetic choice. Its steady flame provides light for evening tasks, while creating the sort of warm, intimate atmosphere that makes family conversation feel more meaningful and connected. She's added a small amount of scented oil to the flame, so the light carries hints of frankincense that will supposedly enhance everyone's dreams and discourage negative spiritual influences. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian evening rituals were primarily practical or spiritual. But as you watch your family settling into the familiar comfort of nighttime preparations, you're struck by how effectively these simple practices create both physical security and emotional reassurance. The combination of practical measures, secure food storage, banked fires, clean sleeping areas, with spiritual protections like blessed onions and scented lamps, addresses human needs on multiple levels simultaneously. The children begin showing the first signs of genuine tiredness, their earlier enthusiasm giving way to the sort of drowsy contentment that makes bedtime negotiations much easier. Your youngest daughter curls up against your side while you finish your evening meal, her breathing already beginning to slow and deepen in the way that suggests sleep isn't far away. Your son continues his reed construction project, but with less intensity, occasionally pausing to rest his eyes or lean against his father's shoulder. The neighborhood around you is settling into its own evening rhythm. You can hear other families conducting their own bedtime preparations, the soft murmur of conversations and lullabies drifting through the warm air. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a simple reed flute, the melody wandering and improvisational, but somehow perfectly suited to the transition from day to night. It's the sort of music that seems to emerge naturally from the evening itself, rather than being imposed upon it. Your evening conversation naturally turns to plans for tomorrow. Your husband will continue his work on the tomb paintings, focusing on a complex scene depicting the deceased's successful navigation of the underworld's various challenges and tests. You'll need to make another trip to the market for fresh vegetables and perhaps some of the good oil that makes even simple meals feel luxurious. The children have their own agenda of games and exploration that will require minimal adult supervision but maximum parental patience. As the last light fades from the western sky and the first stars begin to appear, you find yourself grateful for the simple reliability of family routine, for the accumulated wisdom of generations who figured out how to create security and comfort in an uncertain world. Tonight, like every night, you'll trust in the protection of vegetables and the power of familiar rituals to carry your family safely through the vulnerable hours of sleep and dreams. The stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky like tiny oil lamps being lit by invisible hands, each one appearing with the gentle certainty that has guided travelers and farmers and ordinary families like yours through countless nights of human history. You've moved your family inside now, to the main room where sleeping mats are arranged in careful patterns that maximize both comfort and the protective influence of the onions stationed beside each person's designated rest area. The process of settling everyone for sleep requires the sort of diplomatic finesse that would impress professional negotiators. Your youngest insists she's not tired, despite the fact that she can barely keep her eyes open. Your son has suddenly remembered 17 urgent questions about tomorrow's activities, and your eldest daughter has developed a passionate interest in reorganizing her few personal possessions at the exact moment when she should be preparing for bed. It's the universal bedtime theater that parents have probably been navigating since the first human families gathered around fires and tried to convince their offspring that darkness was for sleeping, not adventure. The major historical fact that governs your family's sleeping arrangements is this: ancient Egyptian households typically slept together in communal spaces, not for lack of privacy, but because shared sleeping areas provided both practical security and emotional comfort in a world where nighttime brought genuine dangers and uncertainties. Your family's arrangement in one room isn't crowding. It's a sophisticated social strategy that's been refined over millennia of human experience with the challenges of vulnerable sleep. Your mother-in-law conducts a final inspection of the onion placements, with the thoroughness of a military commander reviewing defensive positions before battle. She adjusts the position of one bulb that's apparently not quite aligned with the cardinal directions, replaces another that shows a tiny soft spot that could compromise its protective effectiveness, and mutters quiet prayers over each station as she completes her rounds. It's clearly serious business to her, and watching her careful attention to detail, you find yourself grateful for her dedication to the family's supernatural security. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem utterly natural to ancient Egyptian families but completely strange to modern parents. Your bedtime routine includes a brief ceremony where each person breathes deeply near their protective onions. not just to benefit from their supposed spiritual properties, but because the strong scent is believed to clear the mind and prepare the soul for prophetic dreams. It's aromatherapy meets religious practice, and whether it works through biochemical effects or psychological suggestion doesn't really matter as long as everyone sleeps better. Your husband settles onto his sleeping mat with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who's spent the day doing work that requires both physical skill and intense concentration. His hands still bear traces of the pigments that mark his trade, tiny stains of red ochre and yellow orpiment that won't fully fade until his next thorough washing. Tomorrow he'll return to the tomb where he's currently working on a scene depicting the deceased nobleman's triumphant arrival in the afterlife, complete with the various gods and goddesses who will supposedly welcome him into eternal paradise. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian artists truly believed in the spiritual efficacy of their work, or simply maintained professional standards for practical reasons. But as you watch your husband arrange his sleeping area with the same careful attention he brings to his paintings, you're reminded that some people approach everything in their lives, work, family, rest, with equal dedication and respect. The oil lamp flickers gently in its niche in the wall, casting moving shadows that transform the familiar room into something slightly mysterious and otherworldly. The scented oil your mother-in-law added to the flame continues to release its subtle fragrance, creating an atmosphere that feels both protective and peaceful. It's the sort of lighting that makes bedtime conversations feel more intimate and meaningful, encouraging the kind of quiet sharing that helps families stay connected across the generations. Your children gradually surrender to the inevitable pull of sleep, their resistance crumbling as tiredness overcomes their natural desire to extend the day's adventures indefinitely. Your youngest daughter is the first to succumb, curling up on her mat with one small hand clutching the edge of her linen blanket, and the other positioned near her protective onions as if she's unconsciously reaching for their promised security. Her breathing deepens and slows, and within minutes she's achieved the sort of complete, untroubled sleep that adults spend years trying to rediscover. The evening's final conversation consists of quiet murmurs between you and your husband about tomorrow's plans and concerns, nothing dramatic or urgent, just the sort of gentle information sharing that helps married couples coordinate their separate responsibilities into a functioning household strategy. He mentions that the tomb work is progressing well, but that there's been some discussion among the artistic team about the proper iconography for one particularly complex scene. You describe your plans for tomorrow's marketing and household maintenance, the ongoing dance of domestic management that keeps a family fed and comfortable. As you arrange your own sleeping area and position the onions that will supposedly guard your dreams, you find yourself thinking about the strange mix of practical wisdom and hopeful superstition that governs so much of daily life. Whether the onions actually possess protective properties or simply provide psychological comfort doesn't really matter. What matters is that this simple ritual helps your family feel secure and cared for as they surrender to the vulnerability of sleep. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that help people rest peacefully, regardless of their scientific accuracy. The house settles into the deep quiet that comes when human activity gives way to the natural rhythms of night, a stillness broken only by the soft breathing of sleeping family members and the distant sounds of a neighborhood gradually surrendering to rest. Your husband's breathing has already found the steady rhythm of deep sleep, and your children have arranged themselves on their mats with the unconscious grace that comes when exhaustion finally overwhelms the day's accumulated excitement and energy. You lie on your own sleeping mat, feeling the familiar comfort of woven reeds beneath your back, and the soft linen blanket that your sister wove during the long afternoons of last summer's heat. The onions beside your bed release their sharp, protective scent into the warm air, and whether through genuine supernatural influence or simple psychological conditioning, their presence makes the transition from wakefulness to sleep feel safer and more manageable. Your grandmother's voice echoes in your memory. The tears of the onion wash away the fears of the night. The major historical fact that would govern your sleep experience is this. Ancient Egyptians understood that dreams were not simply random neural activity, but meaningful communications from the spiritual realm, requiring careful interpretation and appropriate responses. Your culture has developed sophisticated frameworks for understanding nighttime visions, treating them as valuable sources of guidance, warning, and connection with deceased relatives who supposedly continue to take interest in their living family members' welfare and decision-making. The darkness deepens around your house, and with it comes the subtle shift in consciousness that marks the beginning of the dream world's influence on human awareness. Tonight, like most nights, your sleep will be populated by visions that blend memory, anxiety, hope, and the mysterious symbolic language that your people believe represents communication from the realm of the dead. Whether these dreams originate from spiritual sources or psychological processes, they will feel equally real and equally important when you wake tomorrow morning. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem perfectly logical to ancient Egyptians but utterly bizarre to modern sleep researchers. Your family's sleeping arrangement is designed not just for physical comfort, but to create a network of shared dreaming that allows family members to offer mutual spiritual protection during the vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. If one person has a nightmare, the other's dreams supposedly provide support and defense, creating a collective unconscious security system that operates through vegetable-mediated supernatural intervention. Your mother-in-law's breathing has settled into the rhythm of genuine rest, though even in sleep she maintains the slightly vigilant quality of someone who's spent decades taking responsibility for other people's welfare and safety. Her protective instincts don't completely disappear during sleep. She's the sort of person who would probably wake up instantly if any of her family members showed signs of distress or danger, a skill that's been refined through years of caring for children, managing households, and navigating the various challenges that threaten family security. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian dream practices were primarily psychological or genuinely supernatural. But as you feel yourself drifting towards sleep, you're aware that the distinction matters less than the comfort and security these practices provide. The combination of familiar surroundings, protective rituals, and shared family presence creates an environment where rest feels both safe and restorative, allowing your mind and body to recover from the day's demands while remaining connected to the people who matter most in your life. The night sounds of ancient Thebes drift through your house, the distant lowing of cattle in their pens, the soft splash of Nile water against the riverbank, and the occasional call of night birds that have learned to navigate the darkness with skills that humans can only admire and envy. These sounds create a natural lullaby that speaks to something deep in human consciousness, connecting your family's rest to the larger rhythms of the natural world that sustain all life along the river valley. Sleep begins to claim you gradually, not as a sudden loss of consciousness, but as a gentle transition from the focused awareness of daytime activity to the flowing, symbolic consciousness of dreams. Your last wakeful thoughts center on gratitude for the day's small successes, for your family's health and safety, for the simple reliability of home and routine that makes each night's rest possible. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities, but tonight You can rest in the accumulated security of generations who figured out how to create comfort and protection in an uncertain world. The onions maintain their silent vigil beside each sleeping family member, their pungent presence creating an olfactory boundary between the familiar safety of home and whatever spiritual influences might seek to disturb the peace of ordinary people trying to rest after another day of honest work. Whether they actually possess protective powers or simply provide psychological comfort doesn't change their effectiveness. Sometimes the most important magic is the kind that helps people sleep peacefully, trusting that they'll wake safely to face another day of life's endless, manageable challenges. In the deepest part of the night, when the oil lamp has burned down to a gentle flicker, and the house has settled into the profound quiet that comes only during the hours when human activity gives way completely to rest and dreams, something shifts in the quality of sleep that envelops your family. It's not dramatic, nothing that would wake anyone or cause alarm, but rather a subtle deepening of the unconscious state that allows dreams to take on the vivid symbolic intensity that your people believe represents genuine communication from the spiritual realm. Your dreams tonight are unusually clear and detailed, populated by figures and scenes that feel more like memories than imagination. You find yourself walking through vast underground chambers lined with painted walls that seem familiar yet impossibly elaborate, as if someone has taken the tomb paintings your husband creates and expanded them into entire architectural spaces. The images on these dream walls move and shift as you watch, telling stories that your waking mind doesn't quite understand, but that feel profoundly important and meaningful. The major historical fact that would shape your dream experience is this. Ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated techniques for dream incubation and interpretation, believing that specific preparations and settings could encourage prophetic or healing dreams that provided practical guidance for daily life decisions. Your onion-protected sleep isn't just random rest. It's a carefully prepared state of consciousness designed to maximize the possibility of receiving valuable spiritual communication while minimizing the risk of negative supernatural influence. In your dream, you encounter your grandmother, who died several years ago, but appears as vivid and present as if she were still alive and sitting in your courtyard sharing evening conversation. She doesn't speak. Dream communication rarely involves ordinary conversation, but somehow conveys information about the family's future, about challenges that will require wisdom and preparation, and about the importance of maintaining the protective traditions that have kept your household safe through generations of uncertainty and change. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem perfectly reasonable to ancient Egyptians, but utterly strange to modern dream analysis. Your grandmother's dream appearance is accompanied by the strong scent of onions, which is interpreted not as a random sensory memory, but as confirmation that your protective preparations are working correctly and that deceased family members are actively involved in maintaining the spiritual security of their living relatives. It's like a supernatural quality control check, delivered through vegetable-scented dream visitation. Your husband's sleep beside you is equally deep, but apparently less eventful. His breathing remains steady and undisturbed, suggesting that his dreams are following more ordinary patterns of rest and mental processing. Artists often have complex dream lives related to their creative work, but tonight, he seems to be experiencing the sort of restorative sleep that allows both mind and body to recover from the demands of detailed, concentrated labor. His hands occasionally move slightly, as if he's painting in his dreams, continuing the work that occupies so much of his waking attention. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian dream experiences were genuinely different from modern sleep patterns or simply interpreted differently. But as you move through your night's visions, you're aware that the meaning and importance of these experiences matter more than their ultimate origin. Whether your grandmother's appearance represents genuine spiritual communication or sophisticated psychological processing of grief and memory, the guidance and comfort you receive feel equally real and valuable. Your children's sleep appears peaceful and undisturbed, their breathing deep and regular as they rest in the security of familiar surroundings and protective rituals. Children's dreams in your culture are considered especially significant because young minds are supposedly more open to spiritual influence and less cluttered with the practical concerns that can interfere with supernatural communication. Tonight, though, they seem to be experiencing the sort of restorative rest that allows growing bodies and developing minds to process the day's experiences and prepare for tomorrow's learning and growth. The oil lamp continues its gentle flickering, casting moving shadows that seem to dance in harmony with the family's collective breathing, creating a visual rhythm that reinforces the sense of shared security and mutual protection that defines your household's approach to nighttime vulnerability. The scented oil your mother-in-law added to the flame continues to release its subtle fragrance, creating an atmosphere that feels both mystical and deeply comforting. As the night progresses toward its deepest point, your dreams begin to include images and scenarios that seem to blend personal memory with broader cultural knowledge. Scenes of ancient pharaohs and their elaborate burial preparations, visions of the Nile's annual flooding bringing renewal and prosperity to the land, and glimpses of the complex afterlife journey that supposedly awaits every human soul. These aren't frightening visions, but rather reassuring reminders of your place in a larger cosmic order that provides meaning and continuity across generations of human experience. The onions maintain their faithful vigil, their presence creating an olfactory anchor that connects your dream experiences to the physical reality of home and family safety. Whether their protective properties operate through supernatural influence or psychological conditioning, they provide a constant reminder that you're sleeping in a prepared and defended space, surrounded by people who care about your welfare and protected by traditions that have proven effective across countless nights of vulnerable rest. The pre-dawn hours bring with them a subtle shift in the quality of darkness, not yet touched by the first hints of sunrise, but somehow different from the deep night that preceded it, as if the world itself is beginning to stir from sleep and prepare for another day of human activity and natural rhythms. Your family continues to rest peacefully, their breathing steady and deep, but there's a sense that the night's restorative work is nearing completion and that morning's demands will soon require a return to waking consciousness and daily responsibilities. Your dreams during these transitional hours take on a different character, becoming less symbolic and more practical, filled with images and scenarios that seem to prepare your mind for the coming day's activities and challenges. You find yourself mentally rehearsing conversations with neighbors, planning the most efficient route through tomorrow's marketing tasks, and reviewing the household supplies that will need attention and replenishment. It's as if your sleeping mind is conducting its own version of morning preparations, organizing thoughts and priorities before consciousness fully returns. The major historical fact that governs this pre-dawn period is this. Ancient Egyptians recognized that the transition from sleep to wakefulness was a spiritually significant time when the boundaries between different states of consciousness were most permeable, requiring careful attention to dreams, physical sensations, and environmental signs that might provide guidance for the day ahead. Your gradual awakening isn't just a biological process, it's a culturally structured experience that connects personal rest to larger patterns of cosmic renewal and daily rebirth. The oil lamp has burned very low now, its flame reduced to a small point of light that still manages to cast gentle shadows on the familiar walls of your home. The scented oil has long since been consumed, but the clay vessel retains subtle traces of fragrance that continue to perfume the air with hints of frankincense and protection. Your mother-in-law, who has the light sleep of someone accustomed to monitoring other people's welfare, stirs slightly and automatically checks the lamp's condition, her movements so practiced and unconscious that she barely seems to wake. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem perfectly logical to ancient Egyptians, but utterly bizarre to modern sleep hygiene. Your family's approach to dawn awakening involves a brief ceremony of gratitude toward the onions that have protected your sleep, including gentle touching of each bulb to confirm that they've successfully absorbed any negative influences that might have threatened the household during the night. It's like thanking your security guards at the end of their shift, except your guards are vegetables and their payment is eventually being chopped up and added to soup. Your husband begins to show the first signs of natural awakening, his breathing becoming less deep and regular as his mind starts processing the approaching demands of another day's work on the tomb paintings that will ensure his current patron's comfortable afterlife. His hands move slightly, as if he's already beginning to plan the day's artistic challenges, the complex scenes of divine judgment and eternal paradise that require both technical skill and deep understanding of religious symbolism and traditional iconography. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian morning routines were primarily practical or spiritual. But as you feel your own consciousness gradually returning from the realm of dreams and symbolic visions, you're aware that the distinction matters less than the sense of continuity and security these practices provide. The transition from protected sleep to active engagement with daily challenges feels manageable and natural, supported by traditions that have helped countless generations navigate the vulnerable moments between rest and responsibility. The children remain deeply asleep, their bodies and minds still engaged in the intensive processing and growth that requires extended periods of unconsciousness during childhood development. Their breathing continues steady and peaceful, suggesting that their dreams are following healthy patterns of mental and emotional integration that will prepare them for another day of learning, play, and gradual preparation for adult responsibilities and social participation. The neighborhood around your house is beginning to show its own signs of approaching dawn. You can hear the first stirrings of early risers preparing for work, the soft sounds of animals being tended, and the distant murmur of temple activities that mark the daily renewal of humanity's relationship with the divine forces that supposedly govern natural and social harmony. It's the gentle soundtrack of civilization preparing to resume its eternal dance of survival, creativity, and meaning-making. As you lie in the familiar comfort of your sleeping mat, feeling the onion's protective presence and listening to your family's peaceful breathing, you find yourself grateful for another night of safe rest and looking forward to the day's ordinary challenges and small satisfactions. The dreams you've experienced during the night feel significant and meaningful, though their exact interpretation will require careful consideration and perhaps consultation with someone more skilled in understanding the symbolic language of spiritual communication. The very first hints of dawn begin to appear at the edges of darkness, not yet true light, but rather a subtle lessening of night's intensity that suggests the approaching return of solar energy and daily activity to the world. This is the time your people call the hour of possibilities, when the boundary between sleep and wakefulness, between the spiritual and physical realms, becomes most permeable and significant. Your family continues to rest, but there's a quality of expectation in the air, as if everyone's unconscious minds are preparing for the gentle transition back to conscious engagement with life's practical demands. You find yourself in that liminal state between sleeping and waking, aware of your physical surroundings, but still connected to the symbolic realm of dreams that has occupied your mind throughout the night. The visions of underground chambers and moving wall paintings continue to drift through your consciousness, mixing with more mundane concerns about today's bread making, market visits, and the ongoing challenge of managing a household in a world where every necessity requires personal attention and careful planning. The major historical fact that shapes this dawn period is this: ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated morning rituals that honored both the returning sun god Ra and the protective deities who had supposedly guarded human sleep during the vulnerable hours of darkness. Your gradual awakening isn't just a personal biological process, it's participation in a cosmic drama of daily renewal that connects your family's rest and recovery to the larger patterns of divine activity that sustain the natural and social order. Your mother-in-law is the first to fully wake, her internal clock attuned to the subtle rhythms of household management that have governed her daily routine for decades. She moves quietly through the morning's initial tasks, checking the fire's coals, examining the water supply, and conducting her ritualized inspection of the onions that have protected her family through another night. Her movements are economical and purposeful, reflecting the accumulated wisdom of someone who understands that smooth morning routines create the foundation for successful days. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem utterly natural to ancient Egyptians but completely strange to modern families. Your dawn routine includes a brief ceremony of dream sharing, where family members who remember significant nighttime visions describe them to each other for collective interpretation and guidance. It's like morning coffee conversation, except instead of discussing yesterday's events, you're analyzing supernatural communications and planning your day based on advice from deceased relatives and various gods who apparently take personal interest in ordinary people's domestic decisions. Your husband stirs naturally as the pre-dawn light begins to filter through the small windows, his artisan's awareness of time and light automatically responding to the approaching moment when he'll need to resume his work on the tomb paintings that represent both his livelihood and his contribution to his patron's eternal welfare. He stretches carefully, working out the stiffness that comes from sleeping on reed mats, and begins the mental preparation for another day of detailed, concentrated labor that requires both creative vision and technical precision. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian morning routines were primarily practical necessity or elaborate spiritual theater. But as you watch your family gradually transition from sleep to wakefulness, you're struck by how effectively these simple practices create both physical comfort and psychological security. The combination of protective rituals, shared dream experiences, and gentle awakening procedures addresses human needs on multiple levels simultaneously, providing both practical organization and emotional reassurance. The children show signs of beginning to wake, though they're still deeply enough asleep that the transition will take some time and probably involve considerable negotiation about the relative merits of staying in bed versus getting up to face the day's adventures and responsibilities. Your youngest daughter makes small sounds that suggest her dreams are beginning to give way to awareness of physical surroundings and bodily needs, though she's not yet ready to abandon the comfort of her sleeping mat and protective blanket. The oil lamp has finally burned out completely, its small flame exhausted after providing light and fragrance throughout the night's vigil. The clay vessel still retains warmth from the consumed oil, and the lingering scent of frankincense continues to perfume the air with suggestions of protection and spiritual blessing. Your mother-in-law will need to refill and relight it before tonight's routine begins again, maintaining the household's ongoing defense against whatever supernatural influences might threaten family security and peaceful rest. As true dawn approaches and the night's dreams begin to fade into memory, you find yourself reflecting on the strange mixture of practical wisdom and hopeful superstition that governs so much of daily life in your time and place. Whether the onions actually possess protective properties, whether dreams truly represent communication from spiritual realms, whether morning rituals genuinely influence the day's events, these questions matter less than the comfort, security, and sense of meaning these practices provide for ordinary people trying to navigate the challenges of survival, family, and community in an uncertain world. The approaching sunrise promises another day of familiar routines and manageable challenges, supported by traditions that have helped countless generations create homes where families can rest safely and wake refreshed, ready to engage with whatever mixture of mundane tasks and unexpected opportunities awaits in the hours ahead. The sun's first rays begin to paint the eastern horizon in shades of gold and rose, signaling the official end of night's domain and the beginning of another day in the eternal cycle that has governed human activity since the first families gathered around fires and tried to create security and meaning in an uncertain world. The light creeps gradually into your house through the small windows, transforming familiar spaces from mysterious nighttime territories back into the practical, comfortable rooms where your family conducts the business of daily life. Your mother-in-law rises fully now, her movements deliberate and efficient as she begins the morning tasks that will set the tone for everyone else's day. She examines the onions that have completed their nighttime vigil, nodding with satisfaction at their apparent success in protecting the household from whatever supernatural influences might have threatened family security during the vulnerable hours of sleep. The bulbs that show signs of having absorbed negative energy, slight discoloration, unusual softness, are set aside for cooking use, while the ones that remain firm and fresh can potentially serve another night's protective duty. The major historical fact that governs your morning awakening is this: ancient Egyptian households operated on sophisticated schedules that synchronized family activities with both solar rhythms and religious observances, creating daily patterns that connected individual welfare to larger cosmic cycles of renewal and divine blessing. Your morning routine isn't just personal convenience. It's participation in a culturally structured approach to time that has evolved over millennia to maximize both practical efficiency and spiritual security. You stretch and begin your own transition from sleeping to waking consciousness, feeling the familiar stiffness in your joints that comes from a night spent on reed mats, but also the deeper satisfaction of genuine rest and dream-enriched sleep. The visions that populated your nighttime hours, underground chambers, moving wall paintings, your grandmother's reassuring presence, begin to fade into memory, but they leave behind a sense of having received important guidance and protective blessing for the day ahead. The weird cultural tidbit that would seem perfectly reasonable to ancient Egyptians, but utterly bizarre to modern sleep researchers. Your family's morning routine includes a collective sniffing ceremony where everyone breathes deeply near the onions that have protected their sleep, not just to benefit from their lingering spiritual properties, but to confirm that the vegetables have successfully absorbed any nighttime negativity and are ready for either continued protective service or transformation into soup ingredients. Your husband sits up on his sleeping mat and begins the careful process of preparing his mind and body for another day of detailed artistic work on tomb paintings that will supposedly ensure his patron's comfortable journey through the afterlife and successful arrival in eternal paradise. The pigments and brushes that represent both his livelihood and his contribution to cosmic order wait patiently for his attention. ready to transform blank limestone walls into elaborate scenes of divine judgment, spiritual transformation, and posthumous reward. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian mourning rituals were primarily practical organization or elaborate religious theater. But as you watch your family gradually shake off sleep's influence and prepare for conscious engagement with daily challenges, you're impressed by how effectively these simple practices create both individual readiness and collective harmony. The shared experience of protected sleep, dream sharing, and synchronized awakening helps bind your household together as a functional unit capable of supporting each member's needs and contributions. The children begin showing signs of genuine awakening, though they're still in the negotiation phase of morning routine, half-awake complaints about having to leave their comfortable sleeping mats, sleepy questions about breakfast possibilities, and the sort of dawning awareness that gradually replaces sleep's unconsciousness with alert engagement with physical surroundings and social expectations. Your youngest daughter's eyes open fully for the first time, immediately seeking your face for reassurance that the night has passed safely and the day holds promise rather than threat. The neighborhood around your house is coming to life with the familiar sounds of morning preparation. Other families conducting their own awakening rituals, animals being tended and fed, and the distant activities at the local temple where priests are performing the daily ceremonies that supposedly ensure cosmic order and divine blessing for the entire community. It's the soundtrack of civilization resuming its eternal dance of survival, creativity, and meaning-making after the restorative pause of nighttime rest. As you begin the transition from horizontal rest to vertical activity, you find yourself grateful for another night of safe sleep and peaceful dreams, protected by traditions that may or may not possess genuine supernatural power, but definitely provide psychological comfort and social continuity. The onions have completed their vigil successfully. Your dreams have offered guidance and reassurance, and your family has awakened, refreshed, and ready to engage with whatever mixture of routine tasks and unexpected opportunities today might bring. The approaching day stretches ahead with its familiar rhythm of bread making, market visits, household maintenance, and the ongoing challenge of creating comfort and security for the people you love most in a world that requires constant attention and care to remain livable and meaningful. The morning light grows stronger now, flowing through your windows with the golden warmth that promises another day of manageable heat and productive activity along the life-giving Nile. Your family completes the gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness, each person emerging from dreams and rest at their own pace, but within the coordinated rhythm that allows households to function efficiently and harmoniously. The onions that have faithfully guarded your sleep are gathered and sorted, some for today's cooking, others deemed strong enough for another night's protective service. Your husband prepares for his departure to the tomb sites where he'll spend the day adding careful brushstrokes to scenes of eternal paradise, creating art that will outlast empires and languages while providing immediate income for your family's daily needs. Your children stir and stretch and begin the eternal childhood process of negotiating with morning responsibilities, their sleepy resistance gradually giving way to curiosity about what adventures and discoveries the day might bring. Your mother-in-law moves through her morning tasks with the satisfaction of someone whose protective vigilance has successfully shepherded another night's passage. The major historical fact that will shape your day is this: you are living through one of humanity's greatest civilizations, participating in daily routines that represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about family life, spiritual practice, and the art of creating meaning and security in an uncertain world. Your simple morning activities, bread making, onion tending, dream sharing, connect you to traditions that have sustained countless generations and will continue to influence human behavior long after your own time has passed. You begin the familiar process of preparing the morning meal, grinding grain with the steady rhythm that has marked the beginning of productive days since your grandmother first taught you the proper technique for transforming hard barley into nourishing bread. The repetitive motion is meditative, allowing your mind to process the night's dreams while your hands perform the practical work that will sustain your family through another day of challenges and small satisfactions. The weird cultural tidbit that perfectly encapsulates your civilization's approach to daily life. Your morning routine seamlessly blends the practical and the mystical, treating onion-based supernatural protection and grain-grinding domestic labor as equally important components of successful family management. You live in a world where the spiritual and physical realms are considered equally real and mutually influential, requiring attention to both visible tasks and invisible forces that supposedly shape human welfare and cosmic harmony. As the bread dough takes shape beneath your hands and the onions release their sharp, protective scent into the warming air, you find yourself reflecting on the strange beauty of ordinary life. How the simple acts of feeding your family, maintaining your home, and participating in ancient traditions create a web of meaning and security that makes survival not just possible, but deeply satisfying. Your days may not include dramatic adventures or cosmic revelations, but they're filled with the sort of gentle accomplishments that actually constitute most of human happiness. Historians will spend centuries trying to understand what daily life was really like for ordinary people in ancient Egypt, but you're living that life right now, participating in routines that feel both eternal and completely natural. The combination of practical wisdom and spiritual practice that governs your morning activities represents your civilization's sophisticated understanding of human psychology, family dynamics, and the ongoing challenge of creating homes where people can rest safely and wake refreshed. Your husband gathers his artistic materials and prepares to leave for another day of work that will contribute to both his family's immediate welfare and the eternal cultural legacy of your people. Your children begin the process of emerging from sleep's influence and preparing for their own daily adventures of learning, play, and gradual preparation for adult responsibilities. Your mother-in-law continues her quiet supervision of household routines that maintain the foundation of security and comfort upon which everything else depends. The sun climbs higher in the eastern sky, bringing with it the promise of another day in the endless cycle of seasons, years, and generations that connects your family's small story to the larger narrative of human civilization along the Nile. The onions have completed their nighttime service, the dreams have provided their guidance and reassurance, and the morning routines have prepared everyone for conscious engagement with whatever challenges and opportunities await. As you shape the day's bread and listen to your family's gentle morning conversation, you find yourself profoundly grateful for the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who figured out how to create homes where families could flourish. Traditions that provide both practical guidance and spiritual comfort, and daily routines that transform survival into something approaching art. The night has passed safely once again, protected by vegetables and blessed by dreams, and today stretches ahead with its familiar rhythm of small tasks and quiet satisfactions. The morning air carries the scent of baking bread, the sound of children's laughter, and the eternal murmur of the Nile that has sustained your people since the dawn of memory. Your onions rest in their appointed places, ready for another night's vigil, and your family moves through the gentle choreography of morning preparation with the unconscious grace that comes from generations of practice. Life continues its ancient dance of rest and activity, dreams and reality, protection and vulnerability, sustained by the simple faith that ordinary people, armed with vegetables and wisdom, can create extraordinary amounts of love, security, and meaning in an uncertain world. The golden light grows stronger, washing over your house and neighborhood with the warm promise of another day safely begun, another night successfully survived, and another opportunity to participate in the magnificent, ongoing experiment of human families creating homes where children can grow, dreams can flourish, and the mysterious alchemy of onions and love can transform the simple act of sleeping into a sacred ritual of renewal and hope.